What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Interviewing the Affluent. My name is Kwame Barbour, and I'm the founder and CEO of Affluential Clothing. We are a mission-based streetwear brand that promotes the idea that wealth is a matter of inspiration. While there are many different ways to describe affluence, one may believe that it all ties back to wealth and how we express our wealthiness. Affluential Clothing would like to redefine this idea and showcase affluence as a mindset rather than a lifestyle. And through these interviews, we hope to expand the world's perspective on what the word wealth means. Joining us today for this week's episode, I'm happy to introduce University alum and current Director of Student Diversity and Multicultural Affairs, Ms. Yolehema Felican. Yolehema, how are you?
I'm good, Kwame. How are you?
I'm good. I appreciate you being here.
I'm happy to be here. I'm certainly super proud of you and just happy to be on this platform with you.
Those who don't know you, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your time at the university?
Well, as you mentioned, Kwame, my name is Yolehema Felican. I'm the most recent director of the Office of Student Diversity and Multicultural Affairs. I went to Fairfield. I graduated about 10 years ago. And since coming back to Fairfield, I'm very vocal about being the person I needed when I was a student here, creating spaces not only for students, but for faculty and staff alike. And just really, thinking about opportunity, thinking about access, thinking about spaces, and being your truest and authentic self. So if I can even, if I had to describe myself in one word, I would definitely say authentic, because I show up as me and I show up unapologetically me in every space that I'm present. And over time, I've realized that takes a lot of courage, but it's something that you have to do, and just show up as you, because there's no one else I would rather be and there's no one else I can be.
Most definitely. So aside from that, if there's one particular value that you live by, what is that and why?
A particular value?
Yes.
I would have to say integrity. And I say integrity because I feel that integrity encompasses everything. Integrity is, about honesty. Integrity is morals. Integrity is values, in and of itself. And it just, defines who you are and, your outlook on the world and, and just how you navigate in and of itself. And for me, integrity and authenticity kind of go hand in hand, because when I think of authenticity, I think of, you being your truest and authentic self, and then you just having integrity. So having that value system and staying true to it. It's sticking to what you believe in, standing firmly in your truth, and I think they go hand in hand.
Gotcha. You talked about being a student at the university, but also taking on this big role as the director. What does that mean for you?
It means a lot of things. When people talk to me about from my student status to now being the director, one thing I always say is this promotion was personal. I think about my experience as a student. I think about the things that I've experienced. I think about some opportunities that I could have, sought after. I think about just things that I didn't do as a student. I think about things that I've experienced, both positively and negatively as well. And that really fuels me every day. That fuels the work that I do each and every day. And I'm really grateful to have a seat at the table, to be able to be an agent of change, and to not only amplify my voice, but to make sure that student voices are amplified. I think about people who may not necessarily have a voice or a seat at the table, and making sure that I'm being reflective of those voices as well, because I understand my positionality and I understand that opportunity that I do have. So just being able to be that change agent, to do all the things that I didn't do for myself as a student, to be able to essentially live vicariously to a certain extent through the students, to say do this and do that. And how do we navigate those uncomfortable and those difficult spaces? Sometimes I don't even want to say the hardest part of my job, because that's the most joyous part of my job, but it brings me back. It could be, triggering sometimes where you're like, okay, you're helping them through this moment that was really tough for you, but there's so much satisfaction in that, right? So, again, just grateful for the opportunity, and being back at Fairfield specifically and having this promotion is very much personal. Being at Fairfield specifically because I went through a lot of these things, right? So when my students talk to me, I always make sure that they understand that their experience is unique to them.
Right.
But I can understand, right? I may not have gone through the exact same thing because we're also just in different times, right? But I can definitely understand.
Gotcha. And you talked about living vicariously through the students, but also reflecting back on your own experience, in this role, what are a few things that you've been able to play a part in that was different from your own experience as a student?
I would say community. Personally, as a student here on campus, I didn't really feel like I had a community other than, my friends that I have that I still have till this day, which I'm extremely grateful for. But the sense of belonging and community that I feel that I've created for myself and others is honestly just unmatched, and like I leave work on a daily basis saying like, this is it. Like, this is what I wish I would have felt as a student. But at the same time, I can't really say that because, I'm in a whole different area of my life at the same time. But I would definitely say sense of belonging. Like, I know that I belong here in this given time. And like I mentioned earlier, when we talk about creating those spaces, amplifying voices, so people can understand that they belong here too and there's a seat for them. So that's what I would say about that.
Gotcha. And you talked about going through the different stages of life, and a question that I have for you is, how do you measure success, and what does success look like for you in those different stages? Not only professionally, but personally as well.
Okay. So, and thank you for saying personally too, because I think when we think about success, we only measure it from, a career standpoint. And I believe that my answer is probably going to respond to both of them, but I would say I measure success by purpose. So, are you walking in your purpose? Are you, living the life that is meant for you, that you're called to, to do, right? And for me, I say, I'm called to do this work here at this given time. And I think that when you really reflect, and you reflect very intentionally about what are the next stages in your life, you're going to be able to continue to live in purpose. Those conversations that you have are very purposeful. They're very intentional. And as long as you're doing a job that allows that, then that's how I measure success. Very similarly, even personally as well, I think about success with personal development, and then this kind of reflects into the professional to a certain extent because you're a human, you're a person, right? So, we say like, that work-life balance, but who you are as an individual goes into who you are as, a professional essentially, right? Like you can't completely separate them, right? Because then when we think about values, you're bringing your values and you're bringing yourself into how you run a department or into how, you navigate your professional career. But I think about, development. I think about just personal growth, right? Like really truly working on yourself, working on your triggers, working on your traumas, working on who do I want to become, who do I want to be, and how do I get there? And then thinking about, even, your insecurities and things of that sort, right? Like really, really, really working on who you are as an individual is successful, and it looks different every day. That success looks different every day. Like, did you have a successful day? We're not going to sit here and think necessarily about success at large, right? Because that in and of itself might be very hard to even try to measure, right? And what those parameters look like. But I think about it, day by day and saying like, I gave it all I got. That was a successful day. I lived, that day was very purposeful. I was very intentional about my day. That was a successful day. And if you continue to live live each day having a successful day, you're ultimately going to have a successful life.
Katrin, you talked about purpose, do you feel like this is what you were called to do? Is this something that you always wanted to be involved in?
So you asked me two questions right there. So to answer the second question, then the first question, it's not something that I always wanted to do. This wasn't even something that was on my radar, not something that I was like, okay, I'm going to go to school and this is what I want to do. I went to grad school for social work, not really knowing what I wanted to do. Okay. And I had a random, and I don't think it was random, it was actually intentional, aha moment about me getting into higher education. My journey into higher education was a very difficult one. I've gotten tremendous no's and tons of no's before I got any yeses, right? So really having to stay the course because I believe that this was my purpose, and I didn't even know it. I didn't know it until that, I say random, but it was really that intentional, aha moment. Come to Jesus moment, that light was like, you're supposed to be in higher education, because prior to Fairfield, I worked in secondary education and I would support and assist students in getting into college, but there was a disconnect because I can't really help students in college because that's where, that's where my influence, if you will, kind of ended per se. But I wanted to be on the receiving end because I did so much work pouring into students going into college, and now I'm like, okay, I'm equipped to now receive them and to support them throughout this next phase of their life. So this is now the next phase. When I was in secondary education, I was living my purpose. I was living my purpose at that time.
Right.
Then I said I gathered all the skills that I need at this moment, and now the next stage of my purpose is now to be in higher education to now receive those students that I've been, supporting to get to college, to get to that next step. So to answer the first part of the question now, is yes, I truly believe that I'm living in my purpose. In simple conversations I have with students, faculty, and staff, with feedback I get from just, whether certain initiatives or programs or just things that, I do or am a part of, I know that I'm supposed to be here by influencing and impacting one person's life, 10 people's life, 50 people's, whatever the case may be. That's why I'm here, and that's what I was, called to do. So, yes.
Gotcha. And you talked about the road to higher education not being an easy one, and we often talk about failure. So, thinking about that, what would you do with your life today if you knew you couldn't fail?
That's a very interesting question. And as I talk about my road to higher education, I think about failure, this idea of failure. And it really challenged me to redefine failure and what failure is and what failure looks like. And through all of those, no's and, having to go back to the drawing board, I stumbled upon a quote that I actually now live by. And it's I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that wouldn't work.
Okay.
So when you think about that, you really just have to find out, well, what works for you, right? So if you ask me, I can't fail. So to your question, I would be doing what I'm doing right now because one, I feel that I'm in alignment with what I'm supposed to be doing, and two, I can't fail,
Okay.
right? So I would still be walking in this very same path because when you ask about failure, you got to think about, well, how does one define failure and what does failure look like? So when I now live by this quote, I just found 10,000 ways that won't work. That means that we have to find out what works for us, right? We didn't fail because failure has a negative connotation, like, oh, we failed, and nobody wants to fail, right? That's scary, that's horrible. But when we redefine it and we realize what path we're supposed to be walking in, that's when, we understand that we've just hit a road bump where an area where we just have to try again and we have to try something different. That didn't work for me. It might have worked for you. That road to success for you looks different than it looks for me. And we just have to keep at it.
Most definitely. Not believing in failure, what keeps you inspired and motivated every day?
Few things. Well, the overarching piece is going to be possibility, right? The possibility to influence, to impact, what the day holds, essentially. So I just stay motivated by what I can, who I can impact, what I can do, how I can influence each and every day. And I reflect on, and when I don't feel maybe like at my best or like, the most motivated, I reflect on those experiences. I reflect on those times, right? I reflect on my journey prior to higher education, and it's just like, what if you stopped? What if you stopped? All I wanted was a foot in the door, right? And honestly, in under 5 years of my experience in higher education, I became the director of a department, which to me, I'm just like, God, you are amazing, because I was told, no, you don't have enough experience. And I came in as an academic counselor. A year later, was promoted to associate director, and 3.5 years later, I was promoted to director. But that couldn't have happened if, there wasn't that possibility. If I didn't seize the day and say, you know what? We're going to go at this and we're going to give it all that we have, right? And we're going to keep at it until something happens. And things were moving a lot quicker than I anticipated. I am 1,000% grateful, but you don't know what that possibility holds. So whenever, I'm ever unmotivated for whatever the reason is, I think about those experiences, right? And immediately they fuel my energy because I'm like, wow, what if I would have stopped, right? And yeah, that's what keeps me motivated.
You talked about not knowing what that possibility holds, but at the end of the road, what would you like to be remembered for?
I'm going to say impact. And you're going to hear me probably say a lot of things that are like, very thematic because it's really, the core of who I am. But I would like to be remembered for my impact. And impact looks different to everyone and in different ways, right? It could be impact in, having high energy, right? And you're like, oh my God, like, Yolehema always does this, right? You just think about me in that positive way. Or, I wouldn't be where I am today without Yolehema support, or I wouldn't be in this situation without Yolehema support. That, like, the impact that you've had to positively influence somebody's life, to make somebody's life better. So impact in just so many different ways. If you remember, the fits that I had on each and every day, if that's that impact that I'm going to have that's long lasting, I'm okay with that too. If you remember an infectious smile, if that's the impact that I had on you, then, I'm happy about that as well, right? Because impact looks different for everyone, and not everyone's going to be able to experience, such a close-knit relationship with you. But even if it's, Yolehema was that person that was always smiling. And I remember, I was going through something and she just said something. I've received an email, and to be honest and to be transparent, I don't even remember the situation, but I got an email from a colleague and they said, Yolehema, I was going through a really tough time, or whatever the case is. And I think I either sent them an email, like just like a friendly email, or maybe I sent them like a card. I did something that was just kind, and they emailed me sometime later and was just like, that meant the world to me. And in the moment, I'm just like, you don't know how much of an impact that you have, even when you do the slightest things, the smallest things. I'm big on just building community. I'm a huge birthday person, so you might remember me because I got you balloons randomly for your birthday, and you're like, we're not even that close, and I can't believe she did this, and spreading random acts of kindness. If I'm remembered for that, again, that's an impact. So essentially, at large, it would be impact, and understanding that impact looks different for everyone, and the different pieces that I may play in someone's life. Understanding some are larger than others, but something can be as simple as a smile, can be as simple as a sticky note that says you're amazing, words of affirmation, whatever it is, just impact.
So in addition to all that you currently do, is there any way that you think you can increase your value?
This makes me think about the upgrade song. How you gonna upgrade me? What's higher than number one? No, but but seriously, I briefly mentioned this before, but I believe, really doing that internal work and really working on yourself. I think that's the only way that you're going to increase your value, in terms of, addressing some of your triggers, addressing your traumas, addressing, some of those hard things, right? Mm-hmm. Because then when you're walking unscathed and you're walking, without these things, weighing heavily on you, that increases your value. I think about insecurities, right? And if you work on your insecurities and you're securing yourself, nobody can use your insecurities against you. That increases your value. When you work on, and not only internally, I mean, that's to me, that's the most important, right? You have to do the inside work before the external work and all these other things. But just continuing to be the best version of yourself. When people, whether it's graduate or get a new job, they're like, price just went up, right? The value just went up because I'm doing more, I'm doing bigger things, I'm doing better things. And when people talk about the price going up, I wish people also talk about that internal work, right? I just spent a year, finding out who I am, because a lot of times we look at value in the sense of what we can see, right? Oh, you graduated, you're a department head, you do this and you do that, right? You're a homeowner, whatever those things are, we're that adds value. Okay. But to me, more importantly, is that internal work and the things that people don't see, because it's essentially who you are. And that's the most important thing. And when you think about who you are, and you're thinking about how that's valuable, again, it's who you are, so that's going to help you get to where you want to be, right? Next steps, when you're working on yourself, when you're confident in yourself. Because as we know, to get to the next level, if we're not confident in what we bring, we might not go for that job. And we might not go for that other thing because of our insecurities, because of our lack of confidence and things of that sort. So, my long-winded response to that is really working on self internally first, and then continuing to build those accolades, but not losing sight of that internal work that's super important.
Final question for you. What does affluence mean to you?
What does affluence mean to me? Affluence, when I think about affluence, I think about thriving. So I would say it means thriving. I think about, affluent neighborhoods and towns and things of that sort. And I think about thriving neighborhoods or whatever the case may be. And I know that a lot of times people think about, affluence in a monetary way, right? Money and wealth. but I think about it in a thriving way and a mindset way, right? So if we're talking about, having that growth mindset and having that thriving, mindset and always wanting to do more and be more, the financial resources are going to be rolling in.
Exactly.
Like they're not separate. So even like I mentioned before, I'm like, with the confidence and the insecurities. Once you're secure, once you're confident, and you go after that job and you go after these things, they're in alignment. It goes.
Falls into place
it
after.
all falls into place. It goes, hand in hand. So, I would think about thriving. When I think about affluence, thriving and a mindset, and they go hands in hand.
Before we get out of here, is there anything that you would like to promote? Any words of advice that you would like to leave the viewers with?
I'll go with words of advice. And this, I guess, is for maybe the younger viewers or more college age viewers, is don't be afraid to take risks, because you never know what could happen, and don't be afraid to quote unquote fail. And I say quote unquote fail because, as I mentioned, earlier in this interview, how do you define failure, right? So go after whatever it is that you want to go after. And if you reach a road bump or a roadblock, don't think that it's because you failed or you can't do it. You just didn't find out what works for you. So think about alternative ways that you can get to that thing, and whatever that thing is, don't lose sight of it.
That concludes this week's episode. Honestly, we got to cut it here. Wow.